1545. An indigenous prospector named Diego Gualpa climbs a red mountain in the Bolivian highlands. He's searching for something when a powerful gust of wind knocks him down. As he rises, he notices the dirt on his hands glitters with unusual brightness. He fills a blanket with the soil and brings it to his Spanish masters. They don't believe him. They accompany him back to the mountain. Another gust of wind. Both men fall, and when they examine the ground, they discover they're standing on the largest silver deposit in human history. Within 50 years, Spain controls more silver than any empire has ever possessed. The mountain at Potosí produces more precious metal than the rest of the world combined. Spanish treasure fleets carry unimaginable wealth across the Atlantic. The empire builds grand palaces, fights ambitious wars, and dominates European politics. And within a century, Spain has declared bankruptcy 4 times, destroyed its own economy through runaway inflation, and surrendered its position as Europe's superpower to nations that possessed far less natural wealth. This isn't about bad luck. This isn't about external enemies. This is what happens when an empire mistakes resource extraction for economic development, when a government confuses incoming treasure with actual prosperity, when a nation discovers too late that having too much money can be just as destructive as having too little. The mountain that changed the world, 1545. Cerro Rico rises 15,827 feet above sea level in what will become Bolivia. The Incas knew about its silver. They mined small quantities for their empire. They considered the mountain sacred. They built shrines on its slopes. They believed lightning came from the thunder god, flashing his silver robes. The Spanish conquer the region in the 1530s. They hear rumors about the Red Mountain. When Gualpa shows them his discovery, they understand immediately what they've found. The ore contains up to 40% silver by weight. A single ton holds 12,000 troy ounces. You don't need sophisticated technology to extract it. Simple smelting in crude ceramic ovens works perfectly. By 1560, 3,200 laborers work the mountain. They're mining, crushing, and smelting ore continuously. Potosí ships 5 million troy ounces of silver per year. The city explodes in population. By 1600, 200,000 people live in Potosí, making it one of the largest cities on Earth, larger than London, larger than Paris. A mining town at 13,000 feet becomes one of civilization's great metropolises, but the richest ores don't last forever. By 1565, the easily accessible silver is gone. Production plummets. The Spanish face a crisis. Then, in 1571, they introduce mercury amalgamation to the mines. The patio process allows extraction from lower-grade ores. Production doesn't just recover, it explodes. The decade from 1575 to 1585 sees output increase 5-fold. In 1592, Potosí produces 7.1 million ounces of silver in a single year, the highest output in its history. Between 1545 and 1650, Potosí alone produces roughly half of all Spanish America's silver. Officially registered production reaches 450 million ounces. The actual figure is certainly higher. Smuggling is rampant. Records are fraudulent. Nobody tracks everything. Between 1500 and 1800, Cerro Rico produces an estimated 60,000 tons of pure silver. That's 132 million pounds. More than half of the world's silver supply in the 16th and 17th centuries comes from this single mountain. The Spanish motto for Potosí isn't modest. It reads, "I am rich Potosí, treasure of the world, king of all mountains and envy of kings." The price revolution. That nobody understood. 1550. European prices have been relatively stable for centuries. Then, silver from the Americas starts arriving in significant quantities. By 1560, prices have already doubled across much of Europe. By 1600, they have increased 3 to 4 times their early century levels. Modern economists call this the Spanish price revolution. The inflation averages roughly 1.2% per year, compounded over 150 years. By modern standards, that's nothing. By 16th century standards, it's catastrophic. Nobody understands what's happening. The concept of inflation barely exists. Medieval economic theory provides no framework for understanding why the same amount of money buys progressively less. The mechanism is straightforward. In the 1500s, money means gold and silver coins. When you flood the market with silver, you're essentially printing money. The money supply increases dramatically, but the supply of goods doesn't increase at the same rate. More money chasing the same quantity of goods means prices rise. It's basic economics. But nobody in 16th century Spain comprehends it. Spain gets hit hardest. Silver arrives in Seville by the shipload. The treasure goes to Madrid. Prices spike in Spanish cities before spreading to the rest of Europe. Spanish prices consistently lead European price increases. The correlation is obvious to modern observers. To contemporary Spaniards, it's inexplicable bad fortune. The inflation undermines Spanish competitiveness immediately. Spanish wages rise to match rising prices. Spanish manufactured goods become expensive compared to imports from France, England, and the Netherlands. Foreign merchants undercut Spanish producers. Industries collapse. Spain becomes dependent on imports paid for with silver. The silver flows right back out of the country into foreign hands. The bankruptcies that should have been warnings. 1557. King Philip II declares his first bankruptcy. He's been king for just 1 year. He inherited debts from his father, Charles V, who borrowed enormous sums from German and Italian banking families. Philip can't service the debt. He suspends payments. The restructuring takes years. Bankers lose substantial sums. Some go under entirely. The Fugger banking house, one of Europe's most powerful financial institutions, takes massive losses. But they keep lending. So do the Genoese. So do everyone else. Because Spain controls the silver. As long as treasure fleets keep arriving from the Americas, creditors believe they'll eventually be repaid. 1560. Philip defaults again. Another restructuring. More losses for creditors, more delays in repayment. The pattern establishes itself early. 1575. The third bankruptcy. This one's the big one. Philip suspends payments on 14.6 million ducats of debt. That's twice the government's annual revenue. The immediate cause is military spending. The Dutch revolt drains resources. The Holy League war against the Ottomans costs a fortune. Philip requests additional funding from the Cortes. They refuse, so he defaults. The settlement comes in 1577. Bankers accept write-offs between 30% and 58%, depending on their specific loans. On average, Philip repays 62 cents on the ducat. The bankers agree to it. Why? Because lending stops completely during the suspension. The Spanish government pays higher interest rates to compensate for risk. Rates that started at 17% under Charles the Veinec reached 48% by the 1570s. Even with substantial haircuts, the loans remained profitable over time. 1596. Philip defaults for the fourth and final time. He's 70 years old. He's been at war for most of his reign. The 1588 Armada disaster cost 10 million ducats to build, another 10 million to rebuild the fleet after the destruction. The settlement in 1597 restructures 7 million ducats. This time the haircut is smaller. Philip pays roughly 81 cents on the ducat. He dies 2 years later. The numbers tell the story. In 1556, when Philip inherits the throne, the crown's debt stands at roughly 20 million ducats with annual revenue of 6 million. By 1598, when Philip dies, the debt reaches 85.5 million ducats, while annual revenue barely tops 9.7 million. The debt has more than quadrupled. Revenue has increased less than 2/3. The math doesn't work. It never worked. Everyone knew it. The lending continued anyway. The wars that consumed everything. Philip II wages war continuously. He fights the Ottomans in the Mediterranean. He fights the Dutch in the Netherlands. He fights the English across the Atlantic. He fights the French whenever opportunity presents. Every conflict drains resources. None produces lasting benefits. The Dutch revolt becomes the defining catastrophe. It starts in 1567 as a limited uprising over taxation and religious freedom. Philip sends the Duke of Alba to crush it with overwhelming force. Alba's brutal persecution of Protestants transforms a manageable crisis into a war of independence. The conflict lasts 80 years. It costs Spain a fortune. The Netherlands eventually wins its freedom anyway. Military expenditure spikes in the early 1570s with the Holy League War and the intensifying Dutch revolt. In 1574, war costs peak. The 1575 bankruptcy follows directly. The next decade sees relatively limited military spending. Then, in 1583, hostilities resume in the Netherlands. Costs climb steadily. The 1588 Armada represents 10 million ducats in a single year, equivalent to more than a year's total revenue. The fleet is destroyed. Spain has to spend another 10 million rebuilding naval defenses. Philip pours silver into military adventures instead of productive investment. Spain develops no domestic industries, no manufacturing base, no technological innovation. The country imports manufactured goods from abroad and pays for them with American silver. The silver leaves Spain as fast as it arrives. Foreign merchants grow rich, Spanish cities decline, the productive economy withers, the resource curse nobody recognized. The pattern is visible now. Economists call it the resource curse or Dutch disease. Countries that discover valuable natural resources often experience economic decline rather than growth. The mechanism operates through multiple channels. First, the incoming wealth causes inflation. Local prices rise, wages increase, domestic industries become uncompetitive, imports flood in, manufacturing collapses. The economy becomes dependent on resource extraction alone. Second, governments focus on controlling resource wealth rather than building productive capacity. Spain invests in military power to protect treasure fleets and American colonies. It doesn't invest in agriculture, manufacturing, or trade infrastructure. When the silver flow eventually slows, the economy has no alternative foundation. Third, Easy money corrupts institutions. Why develop efficient tax systems when treasure ships arrive annually? Why reform administration when the crown can borrow against future silver deliveries? Why encourage innovation when you can import everything needed? The silver creates perverse incentives throughout the system. By 1600, Spain faces systematic decline despite controlling unprecedented mineral wealth. Income from American bullion makes up 25% of King Philip II's revenue near the end of his reign. That's a massive dependency on a single source. When silver production at Potosí begins its long decline after 1600, Spanish finances collapse further. The country never recovers its position. Compare Spain to England or the Netherlands. These countries possess no silver mines, no gold deposits, no easy wealth. They develop through trade, manufacturing, and financial innovation. They build banking systems. They invest in productive enterprises. They create wealth rather than extracting it. By 1650, both have surpassed Spain economically despite Spain's continued silver imports. The human cost nobody counted. The silver extraction operates on forced labor. The Spanish adapt the Inca Mita system. Indigenous communities must supply workers to the mines on rotation. The conditions are horrific. Men work in unventilated tunnels at 13,000 feet elevation. They breathe air thick with rock dust and lamp smoke. They're exposed to mercury used in the amalgamation process. Mercury poisoning becomes endemic. Contemporary observers estimate 8 million indigenous workers die in the mines during Spanish colonial rule. Modern historians dispute this figure. They suggest hundreds of thousands, not millions. The exact number remains unknown and probably unknowable. What's certain is that mortality rates are catastrophic. Communities are devastated. Indigenous populations plummet. The mountain earns its nickname, the one that eats men. The wealth extracted from Potosí built Baroque churches in Seville and Madrid. It financed armies that marched across Europe. It paid for grand palaces and artistic masterpieces. The Spanish Golden Age flourished on silver carried from the Andes by men who died by the thousands mining it. The empire celebrated its cultural achievements. It didn't count the human cost of producing them. The decline that couldn't be stopped, 1648. The Treaty of Westphalia ends the 30 Years' War. Spain loses significant European influence. The Dutch Republic gains formal independence after 80 years of fighting. Spain's position as Europe's dominant power is finished, 1659. The Treaty of the Pyrenees ends war with France. Spain cedes territory. Philip IV acknowledges French military superiority. The empire that once dominated Europe accepts subordinate status. The economic indicators confirm the political decline. Spanish population drops in the 17th century. Agricultural production falls. Manufacturing remains minimal. The country imports grain. It imports cloth. It imports finished goods of every description. It exports wool, wine, and less silver every year as Potosí's production decreases. By 1700, Spain's economy has effectively collapsed. The country that once controlled half the world's silver struggles with basic fiscal management. Mexico and Peru continue producing precious metals. The wealth flows through Spain to creditors in Genoa, Amsterdam, and London. The Spanish Empire becomes a conduit for transferring American resources to more productive European economies. The lesson should have been obvious. Natural resource wealth doesn't guarantee prosperity. Easy money doesn't build strong economies. Real economic development requires investment in productive capacity, institutional quality, and human capital. Spain had none of these. It had silver. And the silver destroyed it more effectively than any foreign enemy could have. The empire that ruled from Mexico to Manila, that fought wars on 4 continents, that transformed global trade patterns and connected the old world to the new, bankrupted itself with treasure. That's the paradox of the Spanish silver flood. Too much wealth, poorly managed, proved worse than poverty. The mountain that was supposed to make Spain eternal instead accelerated its decline. And the lesson echoes through history. Winning the lottery does not make you rich if you do not understand money.